Hey everyone, welcome back to the Harkins Haven. I'm Brian. Today we're going to be building a chicken tractor because we have roughly 110 chicks that are ready to leave the brooder, but they need a space or need somewhere to go. We have one already that we built last year, but there's not enough space with that chicken tractor just by itself to hold or to house all of the chicks that we have right now that are ready to leave the brooder. So we need to build a second one, and that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be using Joel Salatin's Polyface design style brooder. It's roughly 10 by 12 foot in size. But right now we need to cut up some wood, basically rip it in half, and yeah, we're going to get started.
The first step of this build was to rip up some of this wood. So we used both 2x4s and 1x6s. Some of the 1x6s were in half and some were in 3 pieces to make the appropriate sizes. Then Brian is going to go ahead and measure it out so that he can use the miter saw to cut everything he needs to length. All of the cutting instructions are in the Polyface Designs book, which we can link for you in the show notes below. We won't make you watch us cut everything to length, but there's just some clips of what we did cut before we go to assembly. So we're going to assemble each of the 2 sides right here. And I will tell you that Brian and I built the first chicken tractor while I was pregnant with Ridian, and then we built this one while I'm carrying him. It's not any easier now that he's on the outside. But Blaine is going to help Brian screw together the sides, and the back is just a mirror image of the front, so they're the same. And so this is us just talking about which way we were going to leave the front and deciding that Brian was standing in the front before we go to add the braces. This is a fairly large tractor. It's 10 by 12, and it actually is not super sturdy. It doesn't seem like it's going to be super sturdy, but it is. We've never had any trouble with it. These 1x2 brace posts along the sides really just give it all the strength it needs. Okay, so now it is time to work on these sides, and they seem really wobbly since they only have 1 brace support. It does fix itself, just keep going. Just remember to attach the wood on the same side of the brace because, as you saw, Brian had to fix that one. And then it's time to stick in a couple screws and attach them to the sides. So these are easier to put together if you have a second set of hands. So doing this together really did speed up the process quite a bit. The next step involves putting what is basically a giant plus sign right across the top. This divides the coop a little bit so that you have a front and a back because the roof is a little bit different, and just gives a little bit more cross bracing so that the whole coop doesn't wobble too much. And I will say that our helper is extremely cute, but he likes to throw screws like everywhere, so we do always have to go through and do a screw retrieval mission after every project so we don't run over them with our car. Each side gets a cross brace for stabilization. Pretty straightforward, we're just using 1 screw in each end. Here's the other side of the plus sign, and you can see that the 2 boards in the middle are in different directions, and then these tiny pieces are just for bracing and stabilization of that middle piece so it doesn't wobble back and forth because it's braced by those 2 small pieces. So there's a theme of diagonal cross bracing. This is actually in the middle of the coop, and you would think that it would sort of get in the way, but the chickens don't really seem to care. This wire that Brian's working on now runs from side to side and helps when you move the coop keep the bottom from splaying out. We didn't put that one in our first coop, and we don't have too much trouble with it, but it is a little bit nicer with this coop to have it in there. The top diagonal bracing is so that the roof is supported, The front half has removable lids, and the back half has permanent roof. We will do a video after this on some modifications that we would make on a small scale, and part of it involves that back roof, because we find that trying to catch the chickens is a nightmare because they just run underneath the back. So we'll show you that in a different video. In the meantime, the front half of this coop has the chicken wire around the side so that the chickens can get air and breeze when it's caught. And so I'm just stapling it all the way around. So this section is actually the back. There is a panel in the back that has chicken wire on it. And in the original design, there's actually an external piece that you attach on. It's made out of the roofing material. We have never made that piece and never really missed it. So we just leave the chicken wire on the back. If this helps us see when we're moving the coop to make sure we don't run over any chickens, and we can sort of check on them even when they're underneath the roof at the back. If you guys have looked in the Polyface Designs book, Joel recommends a aluminum sheeting for the roof. He says not to use steel because steel is really heavy, so to use aluminum. Brian and I, when we built our first tractor, looked everywhere and we could not find aluminum. I'm sure that somebody around us has it. We don't know the secret sauce to find it, so we used this PVC roofing, which is what Justin Rhodes recommends using for his chickshaw. And we found that it works just fine. It's still very lightweight. So we're just doing that again. You can cut it with these like scissors. These are actually like tin snips that I have in my hand. It cuts really easy. These PVC sheets are 8 feet long, and this part I just cut off is 6 feet. So these little 2 feet ones are the perfect size for the siding that we need in the next step. So we're just gonna leave those here, and we'll use them again shortly. And just for cuteness factor, here is Blaine trying to screw in the top with no screws. So we're moving on to the roof, and we modified the roof on our first tractor and had some things we liked and didn't like about it. So this time we're not modifying it, and we're making the original design to see if we like that better. In our next video that we do about our modifications, we'll tell you what we did and didn't like about the two different versions. Here, Brian is just adding a little scrap piece. The book recommends doing this just to have something to screw your sheeting into, your roofing material into. And then you put it on the ends so that there's not a gap when you lay it on the on the coop. So just in case you're wondering, there is a reason that they recommend the size screws that they do. Otherwise, this happens. So Brian used accidentally a screw that was slightly too short and it didn't hold together. And then he sat here and stared at it because that was all his hard work. And now he has to redo the whole thing. So he just took all the screws back out, put in a slightly longer screw, and kept going. So yay, it did not break this time. So now it is time to attach the PVC roofing. The original design uses the aluminum roofing, which is 4 feet wide. Ours is obviously not 4 feet wide, so we're just using 2 strips. It doesn't really affect having the gap there. It hasn't really changed anything. You don't even notice. New day, new roof, and a fun helper. So this is the other half of the roof, and it has chicken wire on it. It just gives the chickens a little bit of sun. The other 3 give them shade if it's too hot. This will also let you check on the chickens from when you stand above the coop. So you just roll out the chicken wire and staple it in. Once again, you're supposed to use a taller chicken wire. They recommend a 72 inch, which is 6 feet. So you do this whole thing in 1 strip. We couldn't find 72 inch chicken wire, so we're just using the rest of the 2-foot roll and putting in more than 1 roll. And once again, we haven't noticed that this changes anything or is a big deal at all. It just required a little bit more unrolling and stapling, and it's slightly annoying to install, but use case is the same. I will also say that the original design for this roof uses bolts in all 4 corners, not just screws, and we did that on the first one, thought that it seemed like overkill, and so we didn't do it on this one. It is not overkill. It is there for a reason. So this roof actually fell apart at those corner screws because you just used them too much. And they just needed that extra strength that the bolt gave them. So next we're going to add the roofing to the sides along the back. This blocks the wind for the chickens and just gives them a little bit more protected space. Most of the time they sleep back here, and that will also protect them mostly from the predators. We haven't had a lot of pressure with our predators, although that has been a thing with one of our runs. So we're just screwing it in with roofing screws. So with our first version of this, we did not have this really thick wire, so we didn't use it either for the tension or for this handle. This time we did have the wire, and I will say the handles was excellent. We actually went in and reinstalled it in our old one. It's that useful. So Brian is just adding it in. The book gives a few instructions about where you should put it and how long you should make it so that you can help lift the tractor the easiest. And then Joel Salatin uses just a random piece of old garden hose as the padding for this. We don't have an old garden hose that doesn't work because we just moved and we got rid of all of that stuff. So we just bought a piece of like plastic tubing. It was like $1 a yard or $1 a foot, so it was really not a big investment. And we just cut a 2 or 3 foot piece. Brian is very specific with his measurements, so I think it's actually almost exactly 3 feet. And he put that over the wire, and that just protects your hands when you go to lift the coop.
I did end up and put one of these wire handles on both the front and the back of each of the chicken tractors that we have. This year's and last year's, like Lauren said, I ended up and added it retroactively. What I can say is that these handles have helped, especially when moving the chicken tractor. It has incredibly improved the quality of life when moving the chicken tractors, because before we were having to thread our fingers through the chicken wire and have to pick up on basically the frame itself through the chicken wire. And as you can see here, it's much easier. I can stand fully erect and lift it with no problem.
And yay, it's time for the chickens to go out to pasture. This is their favorite day of their lives, is to go out and get on grass. Both tractors had over 50 chickens in them, so it was a good measurement. The tractors technically hold 75 according to Polyface Designs. We have found that on our pasture, it just does a little better to have a little less than that. They make a little bit less damaging mess, and they stay a little cleaner. So there's about 53 in each tractor, and it's time for the daily moves to begin. We actually move twice a day, both morning and evening, again, just because our pasture needs that, so that the chickens aren't standing in their own ickiness for very long. So you can see how these lids work, and Brian's just putting the water in there, and then the chicks will be good to go until it's time to move them and feed them in the evening. So we thank you for coming along this journey with us, and we do have some tips and tricks for what we would change about this coming up in a future video.